I've grown lots of different tomatoes, and that is my hashtag, crazy tomato lady. This is my little tomato trial. Yeah, so my parents, again, they grew them commercially. But one of my earliest memories is when I was 3 or 4. Mum and Dad had picked all the tomatoes, and I was rubbing the dust off them with a little duster because they couldn't go to market covered in dust.
The crazy tomato lady, do you know she polishes her tomatoes?
No, don't start her on that. Don't start her on that now. I absolutely adore the foliage. Hopefully you can see me through there.
It looks like an extension of your beard at the moment, though.
That's a key category for me choosing plants. They look like my beard.
Hello and welcome to episode 44 of Talking Dirty. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage in his blue and yellow checks, looking a little bit like a cowboy. Where's your cowboy hat, Alan? We've got Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist.
Unbeknownst to you, but I am sitting on a bucking bronco. Leave it there. Over in Cambridgeshire, we have a smiley Thordis Maria, Sophia Fredrickson. It's very early for cracking jokes, you know.
I think it's the cold weather. It somehow feels even earlier than it actually is. But we are, I'm sure, going to be cracking jokes for the next hour or so because we're catching up with one of our favourites on the Talking Dirty podcast. It is such a long time since we talked to you, Ben Preston, head gardener at Yorkgate. I think the last time it was actually snowing outside.
Yeah. I think it was. Yeah, I was up above the White Garden. It was with heavy snow. Well, we've had some more crazy weather, as I'm sure you all have. We had a hailstorm last week that shredded plants, and when I was at the Laskett, it was actually pyramided up the fountain there. There was so much hail, and we were all going completely bonkers. But anyway, the weather looks hopeful for the next few weeks, so fingers crossed.
Ben, can you tell us a little bit about the Laskett? Because you mentioned the Laskett, and I'm sure that lots of our listeners and viewers will know that the Laskett was the garden of Sir Roy Strong.
Yeah, so I want to talk about this today. So I'm obviously head gardener at Yorkgate, who perennial have 2 other gardens, which is Fuller's Mill, which is not far from yourself in Suffolk, which is Bernard Tickness Garden, and then we've just been given Sir Roy Strong's garden, which is the Laskett, and it's obviously they're all spaced out across the country, and it's just outside Hereford. Quite an amazing. In fact, I was actually interviewing for the new head gardener there last week. I can't say any more than that. We've got a new head gardener. So it's basically gone from Sir Roy Strong's domestic, quite very, very elaborate domestic garden that obviously he opened for NGS and for groups. But it's, the garden's described as an idiosyncratic garden to sort of Sir Roy and his wife, Julia Travell and Oman, who was the set designer, but it's really, really interesting. There's a lot. It's like there's taken lots of interest from Hidcote, so there's lots of vistas and rooms, and lots of gold leaf, and I mean some of the most amazing vistas you'll ever see in a garden. But there's no infrastructure there as a garden to the public really. So there's no cafe, there's not really a shop, there's not a car park. And moving forward, as perennial gardens, we have a model that is moving towards the Yorkshire, which is so that people can visit throughout the year. So it's really exciting that people can now visit Sir Roy Strong's garden. Really interesting. I mean, Sir Roy's written 46 books on various different things about art history, and obviously he ran the National Portrait Gallery, and then he was at the V&A, so he's got a star-studded career, and he's a very, very interesting man. And I had a chance to spend time with him over the last couple of years. He came to Yorkgate, and I went down to the Laskett to spend some time with him. And he's one of the most well-read men I've ever met, I think. He's got very strong views about everything. And he's moved house, and he's left the garden, and we're going to do with it as we see fit, which is obviously going to be in character. So so that's the Laskett.
So exciting. I mean, from a garden point of view, what caught your eye while you were probably not able to look at the garden too much when you were interviewing for head garden there, but did anything leap out at you while you were there?
Well, I think this is probably because I like plants, but the bit that strikes me is there's an area called the Serpentine Walk, and one of the last features that he put into the garden was called the Belvedere, and it's this sort of tower that's in the middle of the garden, and it goes up to about 20 feet, and you get an aerial view of the garden, so you can see all the different areas. And the Serpentine Walk is basically, it's a serpentine path that runs through a certain part of the garden, and there's lots of topiary pieces. There's holly, there's yew, there's beech, and they're all, and then there's mixed herbaceous plants underneath it. So there's a juxtaposition between the formal topiary, which is very, very well tended by the lovely Philip that still does all the topiary there. And then mixed herbaceous underneath. So it's really that's my favourite bit of the garden. So, but I very much encourage people to go and visit. And obviously, I was doing the same lap of the garden on the interviews. And I left loving the garden more than when I started. I became immersed in the garden. So definitely want to go and visit when the ball gets ready. You can visit now. Group visits can be booked, and have a look on the website.
It's always that wonderful thing with a garden that is full of great plants and has been really lovingly put together. I was up at Alan's garden at the weekend and barely made it any distance at all because I was just looking at every centimetre of the border. And so I ended up coming away with about 30 acres left unexplored this weekend.
I saw your lovely jacket actually on a picture on Instagram, and a very smiley Alan. You both look like you were enjoying yourselves.
Oh, we certainly were. You are surrounded by plants, Ben. Look at this. You've also gone for a very artful backdrop. If people are listening to the audio version, they're missing out on your kind of, I don't know, art gallery wall. This wonderful grey, which is a foil to the plants next to you.
It's actually stiff. It's stiff key blue is the colour.
Is it? Oh, fancy.
It's very nice. I'm actually in the. I'm in one of the rooms, and we're shut today. I'm actually in one of the new rooms of the cafe.
Well, you know, Ben, if you live in Norfolk, they don't call it stiff key, they call it stooky.
Stooky.
Not sure Stooky Blue sounds quite so
Stooky
sophisticated.
I've got it on my. Do you know, I loved it so much that when my father's a decorator, he came in on my whole stairs and landings of this blue now as well. So.
All right.
Yeah, interestingly, I'll come to the plants in a second. I went on a bit of a cultural journey this week as a gardener. My trip down to Laskett, I went somewhere I'd never been before, and it got me really thinking about the way that we visit gardens and how different gardens are. And I went to Stonehouse Cottage.
Oh yeah.
It completely blew me away. Louise are there. I went with a very good friend, Rosie, who we visit. We train together at Audley End, and we go and visit gardens together. We meet up, and she lives in Oxfordshire, so we met in the middle on Wednesday. And every time I go somewhere like that, and I'm inspired by the gardens and the people, the plants there completely, utterly blew me away. I mean, I'm sure you've been, Alan. You maybe even know Louisa.
I do know Louisa, and in actual fact, she's been the inspiration to me to buy lots of unusual plants that I've seen growing at Stonehouse Cottage, which I thought was phenomenal because it's not a particularly warm area. But she gets away with growing some plants that are on the borderlines of hardiness. And it's just inspiring to see these plants growing. So in actual fact, funnily, you should mention that, Ben, because we were planning a trip. It's still in the planning stage. And one of the things was the Laskett, to go and see the Laskett. And I said, well, it's got to go via Stonehouse Cottage because I haven't been for years. And I mean, I just need to go back there again.
Great minds. I actually, I've become sort of friends with Clive Nichols over the last few years. We've been taking photos of the garden. Anywhere that I'm inspired by, I send him a message and say, have you been here? And he'll say, oh, I've been there 30 years ago. And must go again. Obviously, I always talk about Great Dixter and I talk about the different gardens that have influenced the way that I garden, but it was the woodland plants. And it's that, it felt like a mix between sort of Yorkgate and Dixter, and this sort of coming together of really borders that take many, many years to mature. Lots of things like Uvalarias and Disporums and different Polygonatums, which I won't mention until the flow mark because there was some plants that I like. One thing that really struck me was the Smyrnium profoliatum that are naturalised in the meadow areas. And there was this lovely, the little Athenogalums and the Star of Bethlehem's naturalised in the grass with Smyrnium profoliatum and then cow parsleys. Really, lots of little meadows. Some of them only, 10 square metres, but some of them are a bit bigger. And right through the garden, there's all these little meadows with different naturalised wilder plantings. really, really struck me. And lots of Primula berries, and you could see lots of dactylarizers and all them things that come with the meadows, the yellow rattle and vetches. And so we were on our hands and knees within 2 minutes of getting into the garden, crawling around looking at the ground cover. And then areas where Dicentras were mixing with self-seeded Fritillaria acropetalum, and clearly things that take time, and that's something that I need to learn. I remember you saying before I was a patient on one of the other these borders that I'd like to build at Yorkgate, we're starting to get them planting layers in, but they need time to really bed in and look natural and be really in their place. So that's what I took away from that.
Oh,
that's quite an interesting thought, actually, because lots of those plants that you've just mentioned, Ben, they do need time to become established, and can take 5, 6, 7 or 8 years even to establish. And if we put them into a border, it's our job to make sure that they don't get overgrown by other plants, that they actually have time to put their roots out and to prosper. And then there'll come a day and we think, yeah, this is it. You know, it didn't look like that last year. This is it. Now we're getting somewhere. And I think
that's really interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that, I mean, I was looking around the garden the other day, and we get into that stage where we have this sort of June gap. And there's, you know, just looking at plants that, you know, fill that kind of gap. And one of the almost wild, well, it is wild really, I suppose, plants that does it for me is Miscanthus cambrica, the little Welsh poppy. And we have that in yellow, orange and red, singles and doubles. And they've got mixed all around the garden in various places. And I was just looking yesterday, thinking, God, look at, there's a bunch of seedlings there. Don't waste those. Pot them up and, you know, we can sell them. We can put them elsewhere in the garden, all the rest of it. But, you know, it takes time for plants like Miscanthus cambrica, for Cyclamen hederifolium, Cyclamen coum, Crocus thomasinianus, for instance. It takes time for them to work up carpets and to put themselves where they want to be. They all need a little help from us, especially the cyclamen. But, you know, that's what we're aiming for, that kind of lovely established carpet look.
Absolutely. I think it's really, that's where I'm at in my garden journey at the minute is that every single garden is so different. I mean, we're on sandy loam, but then there's pockets of clay, and you know, we might put these different plants together, but they react so different. You could put I've actually got some combinations of plants here that are looking really good together in the garden rather than just individuals. But you know, things might take over more on my soil than Alan's soil.
Yeah.
And it's literally every single garden has got to be gardened differently, and that time that it takes and precision and just standing back and looking and letting it be, and then editing. It's interesting about Miscanthus cambrica. Sybil, who created the garden here, loved the double orange.
Yeah.
So then they seed all over the garden here. So we actually go around and we weed out the yellows and the singles, and we just leave the double oranges, because that was sort of the thing that she loved the most. And it's become sort of a Yorkgate thing, is that we leave the double orange Miscanthus cambrica. So just them little tricks and treats, and I suppose it's what makes Yorkgate is.
Yeah, it is. It is, absolutely.
Yeah. Those little signatures.
Yeah.
That is a wonderful plant as well. I must confess, there's a big clump of it at Alan's as you walk in. Anyone who hasn't been to East Ruston Old Vicarage, just prepare yourself that before you've even got to the plant sales area, that first kind of corridor of plants as you walk down towards the plant sales area, that takes quite a long time to walk through. And as you get to the end, there's this fab clump of that wonderful old Miscanthus. And I must confess, I was sort of peering as like, any of them gone to seed? Damn, no.
Well, you know, you've only got to ask. I'd have given you a shovel full of seedlings if you wanted them.
Next time, I'll be back, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, don't worry. So then, Ben, what have you got around you? Because I can see some lovely zingy colours and combinations.
I don't know where to start it. I've got a real mix today. And I've got a mixture of good garden plants and something that quite unusual. I'm going to start with the tulip, because I've just brought one tulip, because I could talk about tulips all day. And this is actually Tulipa Doll's Minuet, which is a viridiflora or viridescens, I can't remember what the group's called. But sort of it's actually, when it first comes out, it flushes green here, and then it gets pink as it comes out. But it's actually one that's quite perennial. And actually, I first saw it when I was a trainee at Orley End, and my friend Rosie used it in a planting scheme. And and I've used it en masse in the main borders. And rather than doing lots of different colours like I do in other areas, I use this. I underplanted it with Fritillaria persica this year. That was actually a complete failure. Most of them came up blind, so it didn't work. But this is it's a late one. It comes out in sort of early May, and it's still in full flower now. And it's just one solid. And I rather than lifting them, they stay in the perennial, and we just add 50 each year, and you get that difference in height. So they're not naturalised because it doesn't seed around, but they split from offsets, and you get ones that are slightly shorter that use more energy. And I quite like that sort of using an ornamental cultivar in a natural way. So yeah, that's my favourite tulip at the minute, Dolls Minuet.
Oh, we love that one.
I'll throw that one out of the way. Right, I love primulas. Primulas are great, and there's some coming into flower in the garden at the minute. And I want to talk about succession of primulas as well. And this is, I've cut a few stems. This is Pulviolenta, which I'm sure Alan grows.
I don't.
You don't. It might be too dry where you are.
Well, recently, what we did during the winter, we in the middle of our rose garden, there's a square basin, a square pond, and we had a hedge on 4 corners of it. We ripped the hedge out because I suddenly said, I can't bear this anymore. It's not looking wonderful. Let's get rid of it. So 2 hours later, the hedge had gone. There's a gap. And I suddenly realized that this pond is leaking all the time. And these 4 beds are actually very moist. And so primulas are on my list. I've already got some primulas, but I don't have Pulviolenta.
And it seeds and clumps up. And it you can divide it, every 2 or 3 years. But the camera's not really showing off. It's quite an intense pink.
Yeah.
And it's lovely. You can see the emerging buds. I don't know if that's doing justice. And it goes right down the side of the pond. And we've spread it out and split it and divided it, so it runs sort of down the edge of the pond and down the edge of the stream. It's not a huge area. It's maybe like 15 meters, but that's one of my favourites. And it's really easy to grow. It likes it. They can handle quite full sun if they've got plenty of moisture under the feet.
Yeah.
But semi-shade, they'll do well as well. So interestingly, so that's Pulviolenta, and I've got one that we're going to introduce, and this is grandiflora, which is I'm going to put them together. It's a bit more dainty. It's a very, very similar pink, and it's again it bulks up well. And rather than having, I'll leave that there for a second. Rather than having them all cross, we try to plant different species that flower successionally, so that we can deadhead them before the next lot comes into seed. So, for instance, in one area under the tree ferns, we've got Primula japonica Miller's Crimson, which is lovely, and that does its thing in mid-May to June, and then that dies down, and we've got the Himalayan cowslip, Primula florindi. So that flowers after. So we make sure that we deadhead them so that they don't cross-pollinate. You don't get the Harlow-Car hybrids when they start to get the pastely colours. And then further through the garden, we have Primula beziana. We've got Bulliana, and then we've got some really new ones. Mark's just introduced some Sebaldii types, and then some really ones I've never seen before, like Muscarioides and Ledifolia. The list goes on and on and on for primulas, but this is one that I'd like to see naturalised in the garden. And I've grown some seed, but I bought some this weekend at the Himalayan garden. So that's the next one, Primula secundiflora.
They look a very natural looking plant. That's a very kind plant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll go back again. It's not, you can see this can be quite. It's not. I would say it's brash, but it's quite a dominant candelabra type primula. Whereas the secundiflora is it's delicate but still got quite an intense colour. So yeah, 2 faves at the minute. Right then, I'm going to go a little bit more. You'll know this one. There's a reason why I'm bringing it out this time of year, and it is Salvia leucantha. I won't get too into salvias because we'll save that for later in the year. The leaves smell like blackcurrant, but the reason why I'm bringing it on today is because, like with many tender salvias, this is Mexican bush sage. We cut them back and pop them in the greenhouse, keep them frost-free, or we take cuttings from them. But if you leave it uncut back in a frost-free greenhouse, they actually start producing flowers this time of the year. So it starts flowering with the day lengths, shorter day lengths, before the summer equinox. And it will continue to flower right through the summer. So I've got a billowing pot, and bits snap off it, and it twines to other things, and it's absolutely magnificent. But if you cut it back, it will not flower till late September, early October. And that's one of the problems with leucanthus. People say it's a great plant, but it doesn't flower till the end of the season. Well, actually, if you don't cut it back, it does. You just need a greenhouse. So
same thing goes for Salvia convertiflora, which has the orange. Yeah, I mean, I always try and use some 2-year-old plants of that because they flower much earlier and they go again right the way through the summer.
Mm. And so I was actually looking back. I've still got you some cuttings from the first podcast that we did. They're rooted and they're now in 9, so they will be on the way to you. Right then, I've got a bit of a pot full here. Right, so I've got a pot. The blue and my shirt's maybe not set in software. I'm going to take them out individually, and I'm going to talk about these in combination. The first one I'm going to talk about is my favourite of the lot, which is Corydalis Corns Purple, which is this lovely purple. I mean, it is the most elegant, but it's not just the flower. The foliage is fantastic, and it sticks. Unlike a lot of Corydalis where they go dormant for the summer, it keeps on producing this lovely ferny foliage. Bred by Peter Korn in Sweden, and I think one of the parents is Calicosa. I'm not sure the other parent, but it's got this lovely purple flowers and really amazing foliage. And we use it in combination with a number of different things, and it can handle sort of part shade, and it can actually handle a bit of sun as well. But the more shade that you've got it in, the taller it tends to stretch a little bit. But it's such a wonderful, wonderful plant. I mean, I love Corydalis, but this is probably ranked up there. That's certainly in the top 3. But we've got it with, and this was Mark Jackson, my nursery manager. He looks after the bit of the orchard. And we were looking at this combination the other day. It's Geranium Bill Wallis goes with it.
Yeah.
That seeds around, and it's a similar purple. And then we've got the White Honesty, Lunaria annua, and then the simplest of all, the Forget-Me-Not, the blue. And in my hand here, it probably doesn't look particularly good, but they're all growing into each other, and the bill growing into the Forget-Me-Nots, and the Lunaria stands a bit taller, and the lovely foliage of the Corns Purple, and together in this amazing sort of ground cover around the bottom of the magnolia. It looks absolutely amazing. And I was I'd go out and look at it every day at the minute, but I thought I'd go and collect a little bunch and bring it in today. But really good combination. It's just happened through plants being bobbed in, and that's evolved. So yeah, that's very special.
It's the best thing when the garden just does its own magical combinations, whether it's self-seeding or just how the plants combine. I think that's always my favourite thing.
And one thing I've noticed on the recent podcasting is your gardening knowledge is rocketing. And I've heard you starting jumping in before Alan with answers. It's fantastic.
I don't know about that. But I mean, I said I walked around Alan's garden the other day, and just one of the things that, one of the reasons I wasn't getting very far is not only like trying to identify things and rack my brain to remember stuff, but then also talking of Corydalis, when I then found Alan, to drag him over to try and find this Corydalis so we could identify it, because was it Golden Panda in the end, Alan?
Yes, it was Golden Panda.
Which flowers to die for, but then it is the foliage as well, Ben, that people, I don't think they necessarily think Corydalis, amazing for its foliage, and Golden Panda had these fab little red parts of the leaves as well, and was
kind of red veins coming up into the golden leaves.
I don't know that one. I'll have to have a look.
Yeah, do. Yeah, it's a good one.
We bought a few recently. In fact, I bought a few at the weekend. In fact, I was a bit naughty when I was at, not naughty, but at Stonehouse Cottage. I bought an Indigofera, and I only bought it because it had a Corydalis that had seeded in the pot. But it was anyway. That's just me being the cheap Yorkshireman. But I did buy lots of other plants there, and I bought Corydalis Wildside Blue, which I think is one that's been selected from Wildside.
Keith Wiley.
And then we got a lovely one called Purple Bird recently, which has got a similar colour flower to this, but it's a solider type.
I did a talk on Ipswich Showground, and Keith Wiley was one of the people doing the talking, and there's a very pompous man from the RHS introducing everybody, and he said, "And now, everybody, we have Mr. Keith Willie."
Oh God, so poor Keith. I just think he's the most amazing. I think to be honest with you, I think he's the most talented gardener that we've got in the UK at the minute. I think he's just
his selection of plants is absolutely brilliant. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's but that sounds quite funny with the RHS. I'm just going to rewind to that. So we also have another planting down in the dell with the corns purple, which it's got. Have you got a Hacquetia?
Oh yes, the kind of greeny, acidy yellow flower.
Yeah, Hacquetia epipactis. Well, I got given which I'm not usually into variegation, but there's a lovely variegated one called Thor, and we've got Corydalis corns purple, Paris quadrifolia, and Hacquetia Thor, and they're all growing into each other. And there was an Astilboides that swamped it out last year, so we've moved that over the way. But they're all these, and the Paris is starting to run around. It sort of rides on, it sort of creeps Stoloniferous Paris.
They're three very, very smart plants, Ben, that you just mentioned. And I think that, gardeners, when they come around York Gate and they're going to see these plants, I'm going to just say something now. Please bring a notebook, because you think you'll remember and you won't. If they can't bother of asking you or one of your fellow gardeners what these plants are, and they don't write it down, they'll never remember it. So you either use your phone to write it down, or write it down the old-fashioned way using a pencil and a piece of paper.
I think that's interesting. I mean, that was something Christopher Lloyd was very strict on, and then subsequently Fergus. Is if you ain't got a bit of paper, I'm not going to tell you the name, because
exactly
it's going to go in one ear and out.
Yeah.
It's just reminded me of when I went to Stonehouse Cottage, when we went in, and I looked on the website, it says no dogs and children on leads, which I just thought was fantastic. I thought, that's my sort of garden. I love both children and dogs, and actually I've got friends' dogs that do visit after hours, and I've got friends' children that visit more often, but there's just something very peaceful about the tranquility of gardeners in the garden.
Well, it's quite funny when we were wandering around East Ruston at the weekend. Alan's obviously got these quite enthusiastic pups, and it was giving me a bit of anxiety watching. I think it was Gigi who was preying on water boatmen on this little formal pond in the rose garden. Meanwhile, her tail was just scattering petals behind her as it kind of wagged into the flower beds. And I thought, at least it's a big garden, it's not bad. In my garden, that would be, a prize plant obliterated.
She did eventually go in, I have to say.
Oh,
she just pushed herself too far and then plop.
Shall we have some more of your show and tell then, Ben?
I've got a few more plants.
You have?
Right. So I've got this because it's getting split for division for the nursery. And I want to talk. It's Calamagrostis Overdam, which is I'm actually gonna take a leaf out, put it back down. Calamagrostis Overdam. It's got it's a variegation again. So it's got a white midrib. And the reason why I wanted to bring this, I was actually lifting and dividing, and I redesigned a bit of the white garden last week, and there's a big clump of Calamagrostis Overdam in the middle, and I got a new phlox that I haven't grown before called Mount Fuji, which is a white one, which is a really good plant I got from Cottage, and then I've run Cenolophium dengidatum through it, so you get the ferny foliage and then the phlox, and then I put some self-seeders, Rhododendron annua, and then some pulmonary at the front, and Hesperus matronus alba. Real mixed planting, but the centre of it has got this Calamagrostis Overdam. And I said to Mark, should we split some for the nursery? So he said, yeah. So this is going to be split this afternoon into 9 centimetre pots. But the reason why I wanted to bring it on is because a lot of these grasses, they're only just poking the heads through, and they look very good late season, and they look very good in the winter with the seed heads. But look at this; it looks great already, and it's looked great for a month. We we actually wait until the new foliage start to push through, and then you can take all last year's growth off. So you get very little downtime. It is 11 months a year sort of a plant, which I think is fantastic for a grass. A lot of the big miscanthus and things, you cut them down, and you might do it after Christmas or depending on how your garden is, and then it starts to grow again. But this really, just as it's starting to shoot, you can literally snap off the old stems, and then these plumes of this new variegate. So it's in the white garden. It's and then I'm going to use Miscanthus cosmopolitan behind it, which is a similar leaf but much bigger. I want to give that same effect with the difference in height. But yeah, I just thought it was a fantastic garden. It's very, very garden worthy. If you've got a small garden and wanting one grass that's going to really do the thing, I think Calamagrostis Overdam is top 10.
Got a new phrase there, I think, which is a great selling point for a plant. It's an 11-month plant. There's not many that are.
No.
And it's funny how I said your Stooky Blue was quite a good foil for your plants.
Yeah.
That plant has also been a great foil for all the ones that were in front of it, like your tulip earlier. It was making everything sing.
Exactly that, and I think this is a foil because of that white in it as well. It just works with probably works with a lot of things. So I think really, I've learned to really love that plant over. And it was here when I arrived. I've not planted it. It was one that was in the garden and made the most of it. Right, got a few more unusual bits now. And I want actually. Next time I'm on it, hopefully Jack, my senior gardener, might do an Aroid special, because he's an Aroid nut. And I know we've talked about Amorphophallus titanum at Cambridge and things, but there's lots of smaller Aroids, and some of them hardy. And these, I've got a few Pinellias. I've got three different types of Pinellias. This is Pinellia cordata. And this is the purple form. We call it the miniature dragon, is the common name, which I just think is fantastic. But it's got a lovely purple Marcus leaf. Actually, it smells like bubblegum. Really cool. So I've brought the green. So it comes in two forms. So they're both Pinellia cordata, but this is the green form, just coming to flower, and this is the purple form. So these are a real great sort of little Aroid ground cover for a shady area. And something that's really quite tropical looking.
Yeah.
Lovely little milestone flower that smells of bubblegum, and a very cool leaf. So it's fairly new to me, is the world of Aroids, but it's one that I very much enjoy.
That's very exciting. Do you have that East Ruston? Because that feels like an East Ruston Old Vicarage plant to me.
It's on my wish list. It's going to be a flow man.
You like that one? I've got you a bigger one. This is Pinellia pedidissecta, and this is the first Aroid that I really started liking. And it doesn't smell like bubblegum. These are Jack's babies. So this one's called the Chinese green dragon, I think the common name. They're all got colloquial names, voodoo lilies and things, but you can see that these gets much bigger. This will definitely be hardy with you, Alan, and it's sort of just hardy with us. But the difference, if we talk about Aracenas, they push out one leaf.
Yeah.
Well, Pinellias keep pushing leaves out like Soromatums, and so they keep. You can see there's lots. Lift it a bit higher. It's still coming from the base, so it continues to push out these lovely leaves. And it's quite an amazing leaf, and you get these lovely. The flowers will stop in a month or so's time. I love to use these in pot displays, and when Jack introduced me to them a few years ago, this is the first one that I sort of fell in love with. So that's Pinellia pedidissecta.
Gosh.
He grows all sorts of unusual Aroids, dead horse arums and different Amorphophallus. We talk about the big one, but there's lots of others that are very good. Konjak's a big one, but that's not going to outgrow your house. And then so it's a bit of we do sort of little Aroid pot displays around the garden. And that's very much what Jack has brought to York Game. Between us all, we have really varying knowledge, and Jack's probably got the weirdest plant set. We've got lots of there's always things arriving in the post. Just constantly, every day, there's plant swaps, and he's friends with people at Edinburgh Botanics, so there's lots of swaps come from there. And I think you mentioned Stapelias on one of the other podcasts. we've got a collection of stapelias that have got the weirdest flowers. He's got his cuttings from other places. And
I used to have one of those, which I used to terrify my aunt with. I was only ever successful with it once because I told her how wonderful it was. The scent was, you see, and she said, "You horrible child," because it smells like rotten meat.
Well, it's a funny thing with a lot of these aroids. A lot of them do smell fairly awful, so they can attract flies. But
yeah,
little Pinellia,
bubblegum.
I do love how on this podcast we're building up an increasing picture of Alan as a child, and I think he was quite a handful.
Dennis the Menace.
Yeah.
The Pinellia pendidissecta, it's got two different scents, one that smells of acetone, like nail varnish, and the other, which we've got, is like rotten bananas.
Oh.
Which is better than acetone, I suppose.
Yeah.
But the very, very odd smell. Some of the aroids, they can be quite chemically, and some of them, like you say, like rotten flesh. So
yeah,
how peculiar.
So that is all my plants for today. Sorry, that's as many.
That
as
was
I've
a
got.
lot of plants. That was particularly as we could only see the grass really and the tulip, and they just kept appearing. It's like magic.
Yeah.
From an amateur gardener perspective, one of the really interesting things to come up in the discussion today is that idea that whatever garden you've got and however experienced you are, it is so much about editing and noticing how plants interact, particularly the ones that might overwhelm the slightly less sort of rambunctious ones in front of them, and moving things and changing things around rather than just thinking, well, that hasn't worked and I'm stuck with it. Obviously, you can always change it, which sounds like stating the bleeding obvious, but it is easy to sort of not realize how much you can shape it.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is the comment I always get is say people come in and say, "You've got such green fingers," and look at all these wonderful plants, like that you've never killed a plant in your life. I just say to people, you just need to grow plants and kill plants, and the more you learn, the more you kill. And the amount of seedlings that I throw away that have rotted off, or cuttings that have damped off, all different manner of things that have happened to plants while they've died. Always going through the greenhouse every couple of months, chucking stuff away and stuff in the garden not working. I think it's just about that constant. We sort of go towards that perfectionism, which we'll never attain.
No, you're absolutely right. I think yeah. I mean, that is the key. I think we all kill plants. At times I've said to somebody, well, I'm afraid I lost that, where's my so-and-so that I gave? Well, I'm afraid I lost it. I didn't mean to, but you kind of feel guilty. I have to say sometimes when a dear old lady has got her grandson to lug in the biggest money plant that you've ever seen, and the kind of plant you see in a doctor or dentist waiting room, or even in a fish and chip shop, and she comes back a year later and she said, "Oh, where's my money plant?" And I think I can't tell her I let it die in the frost. I thought, you don't have room for everything. And I mean, you just have to, it's like greenhouse space. At the end of the year, we just have to let plants die. You can't keep everything. And I mean, like your Salvia leucanthera, I was just thinking, well, I've got big plants in the greenhouse as a Salvia convertiflora for the same reason that you've got leucanthera. But, you've limited space, you can only have a few.
Absolutely, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think every year I think you always keep your favourites, don't you? Your best, things that, and then fluid. There'll be some years that we might lose salvias and then we might like it again a few years later. But I think obviously you've been, without getting my hand slapped here, you've been gardening a lot longer than me.
Yeah, I think I have.
You've got a bit more experience now, but in the I don't know, 10, 12 years I've been gardening, and every year you're learning more and more. And I think it's interesting with our traineeship. When I did the traineeship, I did 1 year. There were in 1 year traineeships for the heebie-jeebies, but I was really, really sure that a 2-year traineeship here is what I wanted to establish, because you look at one season to the next. Last year we had amazing weather in April and May, and then we had a really late frost, and this year we've had a really cold April, lots of frost, and then we've had this really wet May. Every year, and I think having 2 years of seeing the different seasons, it gets you really in tune with the garden. And I think if you're only there for a year, then it can be quite, one experience can be very, very different to another.
I think the other thing is that, you know, it's talking with other gardeners, which, and you were just talking about your chap, you know, there's huge interest in Aroids, for instance. Somebody else has got an interest in something else. And those, you know, which you probably wouldn't have had it not for him giving you Pinellia or something like that.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, but I mean, it's all interwoven, isn't it, into the whole strategy. And it's like, I mean, it's like reading Christopher Lloyd's books or Beth Chatto's books or whoever, you know, but there's always something to learn. I always maintain, if you read a book and it sparks one good idea in your brain, it's worth it.
I couldn't agree more. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I'm really got this sense of garden, and especially now we're allowed, going and visiting gardens is, I mean, there's lots of gardeners that don't go and visit other gardens. I love going and visiting other gardens and getting other ideas and seeing how people respond to the space. And I went to the Himalayan garden. It's sort of hidden up in the Dales, this weekend, and it's got a big rhododendron collection. I know next to nothing about rhododendrons. And I went with a partner who's not a gardener. I said, look, we're on an even playing field today. I know nothing. Rhododendrons are different colours. I'll probably tell you a few of the species, but this is a colourful garden. We're going to go and enjoy it. And there was, you know, Mechanopsis and things, but it was very different. You know, it was a bigger space. And interesting what we were saying earlier about dogs and children. That was a garden that was much bigger. That actually, you could take your dog in, and there was fairy doors on some of the trees, and it was a space where gardeners, dogs, and children could all play happily together.
Yeah.
And it was a very different experience coming to Yorkgate or going to Stonegate Cottage. And I think that's what I think about when I go and visit gardens, is that experience, that immersive experience. It's very different in every garden.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you say that about rhododendrons, because I don't know anything about rhododendrons, but this year, seemingly more than ever before, my Instagram just seems to be full of people taunting me with particularly beautiful sort of peachy orangey rhododendrons that I never knew I could want so many rhododendrons.
Well, Ben just touched on something there when he mentioned a few of the species ones, because some of the large flowered hybrids, well, I think all of the large flowered hybrids, to be quite honest, in a funny sort of way, they are rather over the top, whether they be diminutive, you know, bred to be small dwarf plants, or whether they're just allowed to grow 30, 40 feet tall. They look majestic then, but you know, their flowers are, shall we say, in your face. But some of the species ones, I mean, I'm thinking of one that I can't remember the name of. It has small leaves, cinnamon colored bark, and the lovely little dainty bell-shaped terracotta orange flowers. We had it, I've lost it, didn't mean to, but it's gone. But I think if you go to a famous rhododendron grower that grows some of these species, you'll fall in love with a whole new race of rhododendrons.
I fully agree. I mean, we grow lutea in the garden, which also got that lovely scent and the dainty yellow flowers, which is lovely. It's a lovely, lovely plant.
Yeah. Well, that sells not on sight, on smell. It always does. You know, in our nursery, we have plants. Our grower grows plants for us, and I mean, they're there, and you know, the people walk past and say, "Where's that coming from?" Sells the plant, even though it's not an 11-month-a-year plant, Ben.
Yeah, I'm still playing with it. I've had it in my hand for the whole talk. I'm stroking the grass.
Well, I've got about 25 now new Flomos to add to my list, thanks to this podcast and all the things we've talked about. But I started out, before we started talking about plants, with for my Flomo, that kind of plant I really, really want to get. Something that now, the last 2 times I've been to Alan's garden and walked up this walkway to get to the plant sales area and taken a long time to do it, each time this gorgeous little shrubby thing has stopped me in my tracks with its little white pom-pom flowers. And finally I asked you what it was, and I should have asked you more, and I should have got you to research it so that we knew exactly which one it is. But it's a fothergilla of some description. And I don't really know what it's going to do the rest of the year, though I had a little bit of a look on the internet, and it looked like it might have some interesting autumn colour. But certainly right now, walking into Alan's garden in a very demure, subtle, dainty kind of way, this fothergilla, I just wanted to stop and look at it for ages. So that's now gone to the top of my wish list, and I suspect Alan is now looking up to try and figure out which one it is.
You know me so well, don't you? I've just tried to look up on my phone. It says flight mode is engaged. Please try later. Oh.
Nothing I've been thrown under the bus, is there?
Well, it is. It has cream-coloured, like little brushes type flowers. I don't think it's anything special. It is a fothergilla. It's a. I don't know. It's one of those plants that I wasn't drawn to, and I can't think where it came from. Whether it was a gift from somebody or what. I mean, it's not the kind of thing I don't think that I would go and buy. But I'm very glad I've got it now. I've got it. And I think one of the plants. I mean, we touched on this a few minutes ago when Ben was talking. Some of the gardens, some of the plants that you use, they need time to become established. And I think this is one of them, because it has to get to a half decent size before it looks respectable, shall we say. I don't know the variety, as I say. It does have quite interesting autumn colours. You're absolutely right. It kind of goes sort of yellows, which then turn to bronze, which then turn to a bright red. Much of that depends on the soil in which it's grown, of course. But and I think it's, if I remember correctly, it's a plant that rather likes neutral to acid soil. We're neutral here, so we can grow those sort of plants. I mean, a plant that really wants absolutely acid soil, we can't do. For instance, our hydrangeas don't go blue willingly. They'll go sort of purpley and mauvey colours, but they won't go blue because we're not quite acid enough. But we try and help that by putting pine needle mulches around plants in the woodland garden, as and when we remember. But I do think that, I'd like to experiment with having a shady garden and hydrangeas in this garden, in our soil, which I try and make more acid. I'd like to experiment by using a bluing agent on some of the hydrangeas to just see if I can tip that balance. I mean, I can't do it in a big area because we won't have time, but it's something I'm thinking about. And the other thing, of course, is bucketfuls of rusty nails. They'll help turn this.
I do love that the plant that I really want to grow is something that Alan doesn't even know how he got it and isn't all that fussed about.
Well, I like it now. I've got it. I don't think I wouldn't throw myself under a bus to retrieve it if it was dying. Don't get me wrong. I like it. Right.
Well, each to their own.
Each to their own.
Ben, what's your FLOMO today then?
A couple of plants that I saw at Stonehouse Cottage. I'm really interested in the plants that come in the Polygonatums, Uvalarias, Disporums, Disporopsis, that whole group of sort of arching woodlanders. And there's a couple of dark ones. Polygonatum Betberg, which I've never grown. I've seen pictures of, and it's one that I will get for the garden. And it's Polygonatum, so there's the standard Solomon seal, but it's got a dark purple leaf. And it's got that lovely arching habit, but I'm quite drawn to the darker foliage, and I think it'd be a nice contrast to some of the Polygonatums that we've got. Polygonatum Betberg, and then one other, which is very similar, which is Disporum Night Heron, which I think it was Dan Hinckley that collected it, or it was grown in his garden over at Heronswood in America. I think he's fantastic plantsman, Dan Hinckley. But yeah, so Disporum Night Heron and Polygonatum Betberg, very similar in terms of the habit and the leaf, but obviously quite different plants. So yeah, they're my two for this week.
That sounds
lovely. I think that is a very interesting choice, because it just, I think what it illustrates for me is that your degree of sophistication, young man, because I can call you that because I'm older than you. But it does, because that Polygonatum and Disporum, Night Heron and Betberg, they're both plants that would stop people in their tracks. An experienced gardener, they would stop them in their tracks. And I think it's fairly unusual for a young man who hasn't been gardening that many years to be that sophisticated, Ben. Well done.
Gold star.
I'll pay you later.
Yeah, it is. But let's put it this way, they're gone on my list.
Which is a lot longer than when we started this podcast, Alan. What in particular is on your FLOMO list?
Well, I don't know whether this will ever be possible, but I mean, we have a weird dianthus in the garden. And it's a whole group of these dianthus, like small carnations, doubles, grown in the Victorian period, and they were known as bizarre dianthus because they have bizarre coloured flowers. And what they actually have, they're genetically unstable, and so some of the flowers will be streaked. And the one I've got, the flowers are streaked purple and scarlet. I mean, it's the most bizarre combination. See what I mean? Bizarre. Bizarre dianthus. And these two colours are the colours of Hong Kong. They're national colours of Hong Kong. But there was a whole group of them, and I've only got this one, which is called, it sounds very pompous, Chomlifaron. I think it's a lovely name. It should be a dog's name. Where are you, Chomley? Or the butler. Well, let's get the butler in. Chomley! Anyway, I would love to be able to find if there is anywhere on this planet any more bizarre dianthus with their streaked and striped colorings. I would love to locate them. But, you know, it's one of those plants, you grow it because it fascinates you and you have a feeling inside yourself for it. It's an absolute beggar because it flops all over the place. It's untidy. If you grow it in a pot, and I've got a pot with about 20 flowering stems coming on it, I'm having to stake each individual stem. And you've got to keep going and staking until you get to just underneath where the flowers are to make it look anything at all. If you do that, it looks fabulous. If you don't do that, it just looks like the dog has sat on it.
Which in your garden could have happened.
Yeah.
It's made me think, I can't believe I've not mentioned it already today because I was fuming about it this morning. I went out last night and we've got this amazing little Miscanthus on the rockery. We've had lots of rain and it's brought out the slugs and they're massive.
Yeah.
And I just cannot believe we've gone from complete wet to complete dry, and then they must have just been waiting. I'm sure they've just been waiting like an army of leaf-eating thieves.
Marauding mollusks.
Marauding mollusks. And anyway, we've got this lovely, lovely little Miscanthus horridula, which grows, I can't remember how many thousand metres above sea level, something like 6,000 metres above sea level in the Himalayas. It's a little Miscanthus about that big, and there was a fully formed flower on there I was out there last night at 9 o'clock looking at the thing, thinking I'm going to see that open tomorrow, and there was just a bud left. And these tiny little, the rockery is covered with these tiny little slugs, little black slugs. You can barely see them.
Yeah. I went through my seed trays yesterday looking, and every slug I found was almost imperceptible. It was so small, and yet they've taken out all of my Nicotianas and most of my zinnias.
They've got big appetites, them little buggers. Yeah, I'll probably get told off by the RSPCA for this. There was even the bearded iris. There was literally a big fat slug. I've got a picture of it. I'll send it you. Big slug sat on the bearded iris, just munching away at 8 o'clock last night. So anyway, I slung it into the pond. I took it off and it went in the pond. So hopefully one of the fish has eaten it. But I'm in a war against the slugs. But we don't use any slug pellets. You know, we will let it. If I can get them by hand, then I will. But
yeah,
I'm going to stick to my principles. I'm going to be a good gardener. I'm not going to sprinkle slug pellets around, but I'm going to throw as many in the ponds as I can find.
Well, this has been so much fun. I feel a little bit like I'm drowning in all the plants that I now want to go and learn about and look up and grow, but it's in a good way. As
usual, Ben, you've done it again. You've tempted us horribly. I'm going to have a hurt pocket, I think, because I'm going to have to go and get some of these plants. But on the other side, I'm looking at it from the point of view that it's so nice to meet somebody that talks about plants that I don't know about, and it also helps me to improve the garden here. So it's a two-way thing. Hurts the pocket, but improves the garden.
Well, thank you. Let's do this again. Let's not leave it too long next time, because the garden's changing every week.
Absolutely, and you'll have to get Jack on with an Aroid special, I think.
Yes. Is it Jack Ogg?
Jack Ogg is he's like a young Mike Clifford. He just doesn't have a tash. Similar sort. He wears the shirts. He's incredible plantsman. Completely, he's our botanical wizard at the garden. So and then there's Mark as well, who is another botanical wizard on the woodland side and the Salvia. So we've got a great team, and I'm keen not to do the star of the show all the time, although 90% of the time is all right.
Well, we'll see you again soon. Sorry, Alan, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, for your interest, Fothergilla major, which is what it is known as the mountain witch alder. I'm reading this from the RHS website, I have to say. And it's actually it's in the same family as Hamamelis.
We got there.
Because I was going to say we have a Hamamelis fothergilla down in the dell, which has actually got the Hacquetia growing under it, the straight species cactus, and it's got a very similar with the way we pruned it. It's got a very sort of open habit like a Hamamelis. So I can see that it's in the same family.
Yeah.
Well, I don't feel like it was such a bad choice, seeing as you both got it in your fantastic gardens. Can't be that bad.
I'm looking at it. I'm just looking at pictures of it, and I think I want another one now. That good, huh?
Well, have a lovely day, Ben. Thank you very much, and we'll catch up soon.
Brilliant, thank you. That's been very fun, as always.
Happy gardening.
All right. Become a day when you. Oh God, sorry.
Time to establish in gardens at every single garden. Ooh, hang on 2 seconds. I'm gonna have to pause there. Somebody's shouting.
Hilariously, there's the neighbours. They've literally got a ladder right there. I hope they're not about to start being loud. It's difficult, isn't it?
Hook that one up.
Sorry about that. That was the chap to fix the dishwasher that's broken. I've actually got a bone to pick you after the last podcast. I got abuse from my non-gardening friends about talking about Excel spreadsheets on a podcast.